American culture has a long history of changing the stories of survivors to better fit its own self-serving agenda. And it is well documented that the United States government systematically released false public propaganda while stealing land from the original inhabitants of this country. American culture is a culture built on harms inflicted against both groups and individuals, and rape culture is a significant part of those historical roots. The effects of rape culture are much farther wrought than what we see within the confines of gendered dialogue. Before we get started with today's segment, we seek to respectfully honor the land currently called the United States of America and its original inhabitants. As we honor our Earth and Native peoples, please consider the ways that reconciling rape culture within yourself will contribute to dismantling the harm caused against both groups and individuals through the overuse and exploitation of resources for monetary gain. We gather here today on Turtle Island, the indigenous term for the North American continent. The Earth is our greatest resource, and Turtle Island is rich with cultures that nurtured and protected our Earth for all. To the east, in New York City, the land of the Lenape, the river that flows both ways, was home to abundant natural resources and well-developed communities. The original infrastructure of the Lenape peoples can still be seen in the map of modern Manhattan. The Lenape are still here, now called the Delaware Nation, and located throughout New Jersey, Oklahoma, and Canada. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Delaware Nation, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. In Washington, D.C., we are gathered on the unceded land of the Piscataway, Lumbee, and Cherokee peoples. The Piscataway, called the people where the rivers blend, were farmers, many revered for their hunting and fishing skills, and their well-established communities that stretched to and through Baltimore, the Chesapeake Bay, and Virginia. The Piscataway are still here, and the Piscataway people still preserve their native traditions, customs, and memories as seen through Piscataway eyes. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Piscataway community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. To the south, Puerto Rico, called the island of Boriken by the Taino and Arawakan peoples, remains an unceded, unincorporated territory of the United States. The Arawakan were complex in culture, social structure, and spirituality, with democratically determined governing systems and matriarchal households. And the Taino introduced European settlers to many implements still used in modern living. The Taino peoples are still here, the great people of the sacred high waters, and they continue to preserve their tribal traditions, spiritual practices, and cultural heritage, while seeking recognition as the authentic people of the island of Boriken. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Taino community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. To the west, California is home to more people of Native heritage than any other state in the United States. There are currently 109 federally recognized Indian tribes in California, and 78 entities petitioning for recognition. In the greater Los Angeles, there are 14 federally recognized tribes, and the land is still home to 3 federally unrecognized tribes that predate the establishment of the California missions: the Chumash, Tongva, and Tataviam peoples. The Chumash peoples consisted of a diverse conglomeration of autonomous settlements that existed along the coast since before 7000 BCE and were known as bead makers, herbalists, artists, and basket weavers. The Chumash are still here and continue to preserve their myths and legends while promoting sustainable agriculture and healthy diets within their community and beyond. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Chumash community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. To the north, the indigenous peoples of Canada are the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations. The indigenous cultures of Canada are vast and far-reaching, and had formed complex social, political, economic, and cultural systems long before Europeans came to North America. In 2016, more than 1.6 million Canadians identified as Indigenous, and the population steadily grows thanks to increased life expectancy, higher birth rates, and the ongoing work of reconciliation being carried out in recent years. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Indigenous cultures of our Turtle Island, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. While a land acknowledgement is not enough to stand alone as a decolonial social justice tool, it serves as a reminder that we are on sacred land. Indigenous Americans, with cultures just as vast and diverse as those named here today, have acted as stewards of the sacred lands of Turtle Island, our forests, rivers, and meadows, for over 14,000 years, maintaining the balance of the earth for all beings on this planet. Enslaved Africans used their own hands, sweat, and blood to build the American economy as we currently know it. By acknowledging this history, we can find truthful relations, both to ourselves and our Earth, and will more effectively shape the future of this and other planets. Colonization is still an ongoing process, and native lands are still occupied due to broken treaties, practices of eminent domain, and other mechanisms intended solely for the benefit of government or corporate America. May our actions today work to reconcile the repeated violations of rape culture in order to create a safer world for our next 7 generations.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Should we go around and introduce ourselves again?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, I'll go. I'm Velu. Here, this is my, I believe, 3rd time. Sorry I missed the last session. I was trying to take care of my state and my mental health. I'm happy to be back. And yeah, I'm an activist, I'm an artist, and happy to be part of these conversations.
Absolutely. Nice to see you again. I'm Tosin. I've been here for every session except for last week. I'm a therapist. I work with male identified survivors of sexual abuse. I work with students in high school. I do individual therapy. So nice to be here again.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Jones. I'm an active duty corpsman in the United States Navy. I'm currently on duty, but I am a staffer advocate for victims, and I'm a psych tech. Even though I am active duty, my views are just mine. It is not a representation of the government or the United States Navy or any of the branches that are currently serving.
Thank you for your services.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Erin. I'm a therapist, a social worker like Tosin. I work with survivors of sexual assault and domestic abuse pretty frequently. I also work with the LGBTQIA population fairly specifically as well. And yeah, I'm an activist and an artist. Art I've been making lately is not been very well received in certain corners, but that's all right. Yeah, that's about it.
I'm James Sanders. This is my third appearance. I missed, I think, the second one. So I've been involved in sexual violence work for about a decade. Started off on the RAIN Speakers Bureau, eventually worked at RAIN for almost 6 years. Helped manage the Department of Defense Safe Helpline for 4 of those years, becoming the first lead ship manager they had. Since then, I'm working with DoD, and my views, obviously, just like the corpsmen's, do not represent my daytime job. They are my own views.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex, he, she, or they pronouns, and I had the pleasure of working with James for a long time at RAIN, and now am, and also a couple other sexual assault related orgs here in DC, on the local level, as well as domestic violence related orgs. And now I'm the outreach manager at HIPS, which is a harm reduction organization that primarily focuses on folks who participate in sex work, people who use drugs, and LGBTQIA+ individuals.
Thank you. Oh, it looks like somebody else is joining. Oh, Tamika.
Looks like Tamika.
Oh, hey, mama.
Hey,
Hi,
babes. I
Tamika.
had to throw a little makeup on, so I'm gonna be listening for the first few moments.
Okay. Go ahead. We just finished introductions, so we're just gonna start the conversation about what is a consent-based culture.
All right, I can kick it off. So when I hear consent-based culture, I automatically think of everybody being on the same page, on the same agreement for every part. I'm gonna assume that we're talking about sex, consent for sexual, because that's why we're here. So I'm thinking everything that's done or being done is agreed on by whoever is included in the act. I'll start from there.
I think that's a good definition. It's definitely how it should work, really. I think consent can be given and taken away at any point in time, even if like clothes are already off. Consent shouldn't be anything related to like somebody wearing a specific type of clothes, or just because you had an intimate experience with somebody, so that you assume that you can have it again. That doesn't have anything to do with consent either. Usage of drugs, somebody maybe unconscious, doesn't have anything to do with consent. And I think in a world where everyone has a voice and has the opportunity to express when they want to be in a sexual relationship with somebody, that's when we can break this ongoing situation of what rape culture is all about.
Totally agree with those. Like definitions are so good. I think also though I think I do want to take it a step back further, because I like the word consent-based culture, and I think it speaks to something beyond like a one-on-one intimacy moment, and that it starts further back, like with more of a bird's eye view. It starts with kids. It starts with the way that we treat people, teach them about autonomy, about their bodies. I think from a very young age, children are frequently taught that they don't have rights to their own comfort, autonomy, body. Oh, don't mind, like that's your family member, they're allowed to kiss you, or they're allowed to hug you, or these things. And it starts early. And those things ripple and get ingrained in us, and can have repercussions. Yeah.
That's an excellent point, because I've noticed that I think back at my childhood, and I remember vividly how I was kind of forced to hug people, just like, hey, this is your aunt, give them a big hug. I'm like, I don't want to hug this person. And I think about how that that cycles in your brain as you get older, and it's just like there's no consent. There's nothing that you have no say in that kind of interaction. So there's a question in the chat, and can consent be taken away afterwards? And absolutely, it can. Anytime one person feels like they don't want to do anything anymore, they can stop. The consent is over, so you have to stop immediately. I'm sorry, my
Consent to
dogs are
me
barking.
is like a verbal contract with stipulation, because at some point I might want to rescind the consent. You know, on that hugging thing, I am a hugger, but I ask if it's okay. A lot of times people are familiar with, for real, because that's something that I noticed early on with my own children, was that forcing them to hug people made them uncomfortable. So I stopped forcing them to. You know, that was up to them. It is their body. If they're not comfortable with someone, that must mean something. Children are the most resilient people that I know. But still, on that same token, if a child is uncomfortable with someone, it is upon us as adults to enforce limits.
Yeah,
I think it's important with any sexual partner that you have
go ahead. Go ahead.
to set the limits or to talk about what limits you have. Because in the act, some people are afraid to say, no, I'm not comfortable with this. So speaking about like, this is what I'm willing to do, this is what I'm not, but knowing that no means no. And the military has a view that if someone is drunk, even if they say yes, like that's still not okay to have sex with them because they are technically not consenting because they're under the influence. So in like consent in the military is you need to be able to say sober, and a verbal yes needs to happen. And if they say no, you at any point in time, like right at the end, like you need to stop. That no means no, no matter what.
I think like kind of, and that's so incredibly pertinent, you know, as far as like at any point in time and discussing things beforehand. And I think, you know, going back to sort of what you guys were talking about, uh, what you were talking about, Tosin, like, and also Tamika and Alex, like, as far as children are concerned, right? Like, I read something today that was sort of talking about how, like, in consent-based culture, like, we raise children to like believe in the sovereignty of their own bodies and also the sovereignty of other people's, right? And so, like, you know, you have the right to control your own body. You don't have the right to control the bodies of other people. And like, you know, I think that like we can take bodies and then extrapolate it all the way back out to, you know, communication, right? Like that's something that should be consented to. Like, you know, you were talking about hugs, right? It's not just a sexual relationship or sexual touch. Like it can be touch that, you know, maybe you consider platonic, or subjects that you feel comfortable discussing or not. And teaching children, even just like, you know, we like in our day to day of like having conversations, like being able to like take a step back and say, hey, like I need a minute for this conversation, right? Like talking about like it can be really revoked at any time. And so like, you know, our sexual selves certainly are like a part of that sovereignty and that body. But I think, you know, it pulls out to really any interaction that you're having with another person, or like, you know, you pull back out to land and to animals as well, right? Like where are our lines with like other consciousnesses and how we consent. And I know that's a little bit broad, like, you know, but I think that like when we talk about culture, it's like how does that spread out, right?
That takes me to something that I saw today and relating to the rape culture and how it has been normalized and consent is not.
Mm-hmm.
Example was Pepe Le Pew chasing the female skunk, and his refusal to accept no. You know, and this was a popular cartoon. and it enforces that rape culture and the need for the male's desires to be taken precedent over the female's desires to say no to what he's pursuing. You know, that's not consenting. And it taught us early on that we're supposed to give in to other people's demands. You know, and it shook me a bit because that was one of my favorite cartoons. But then now that I look at it again, it makes me weary that I let my kids watch this, you know, and what kind of message am I sending as a parent today when this is what I allowed then? Now that I know better, I can do better.
It brings up what you were saying, like, brings up for me the idea of like consent almost being like the opposite of entitlement. And there's this kind of attitude of entitlement in a lot of that is like where privilege is often rooted, or where privilege rears its ugly head. And you were speaking about like gender relations, but I think that can go beyond. And if I really want to step back, like Aaron did, like, you know, consent can be even broader than that. Consent, like, is when we think about it as the opposite of entitlement, like people just kind of assuming that you are participating in something with them without checking in. And it feels like it's so dominant in our culture, and it comes back to race, it comes back to gender, it comes back to like people with any kind of power, and then inflicting that power, whether in like even knowingly or not, has repercussions for like how people believe their autonomy and their ability to provide consent exists. And then as our consent is eroded over time, sometimes we don't even recognize how our consent has been eroded.
There's also an aspect of consent being extremely specific that I'm not sure if we've mentioned yet. Because if I consent to going on a date with you, I'm not consenting to you kissing me or you going back with me to my apartment. You know, if I'm consenting to one thing, there has to be consent for anything else that follows. So there's a level of specificity that has to be, you know, verbalized and understood by both parties or whoever is involved in the act. That has to be acknowledged as well.
Yeah, I think in a conversation of consent, there also needs to be an opportunity to teach whoever is doing the ask to accept rejection. Because I think, you know, especially when it comes to, you know, I mean, like we live in a patriarchal system, right? So it's generally speaking, safely to assume that the man is the one who is doing most of the asking. Although, you know, like times change, and, you know, I mean, you see a little bit more often that in, you know, like in other genders, but you know, like when you notice that, like it can be really hard. I mean, and when you are basically putting up in a position where, you know, like being rejected looks like weak, right? Looks like a weakness. So you know, I think if we have a space to actually address that and to educate and to explain people that it is okay, and, you know, like you know, like nothing is going to happen if you're going to get rejected, and, you know, it can be a learning process and you can respect people's boundaries. I think that would be a healthier way for people to understand that, you know, like that consent is important, and, you know, like that would be a way to also you know, like create better conversations, healthier relationships, and you know, like healthier communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Like 100% being able to teach people to handle, you know, rejection gracefully. And I think that goes a lot to entitlement too, right? Like the more entitled somebody is, generally, like unless they've done that work, like if they haven't, you know, the more entitlement is there, the more intense the reaction to rejection is going to be, like, unfortunately. And that's not to say that, you know, like people with privilege like can't do work to realize, to not be, you know, pushing that back on somebody else. But I think a lot of times, because we are in a patriarchal system and we are in a rape culture, like, you know, that is the norm. That entitlement is seen as just like, okay, that's how it is, and it's very insidious. And so you know, when people are told a particular story about what they deserve, you know, the response and reaction to that is like a very overblown on an entitlement level, like when they're told no, right? Even if it's not a specific no, you know, like even if it's just you know, in some cases feeling rejected. And we see, you know, we've been seeing that like frequently, you know, in terms of the terrorist attacks that happened on our country, right? Like that is, you know, if we're talking about consent, right? Like that's like, you know, I can't think of like taking a life, right, is taking that sovereignty, is like in its own way a huge violation of consent. But I think, you know, it stems from this place of like people not knowing how to take no for an answer, you know, because of that intense amount of entitlement.
It just makes me think so much about how when someone is told no and they continue to pursue, it's because in our culture, that means that you're not trying hard enough. You're not making the right type of impression on someone. And it just goes on and on and on and on to the point of obsession. You know, perfect example is the incels. They feel like they are entitled to date any and everyone that they choose to, regardless as to whether the other person consents to it. You know, and that's not normal. You know, it kind of harkens back to the time of arranged marriages, because a lot of people ended up being forced into relationships that they normally would not have chosen of and on themselves. You know, people didn't have a lot of autonomy in some cultures.
Yeah.
And because of that lack of autonomy, it put people in a position of having years and decades and time where this kind of culture has come to the forefront of being negative now, because it has been the status quo for so long. People don't know how to change. You know, it's because they don't want to change. They think that they're right and they want what they want, regardless as to how much we push back, how we tell them that it's inappropriate. I don't know what else to say except for it has to start with us as parents teaching our own kids, our family members, the right way to respond.
Yeah.
And I think no means no.
Yeah. I think it also has to do, you know, like looking through a big lens, just, you know, the way that the United States, I'm talking in general, like how they perceive sex, how it's really not talk, or how, you know, like it's women are you know, like objectified, or how, you know, like it's such a taboo topic, and it's not really like brought into, you know, like conversations of society, that, you know, like something that is like completely normal. And it also has to do a lot with the inequality that, you know, like women and other genders still live throughout, you know, like throughout generations. If we had, you know, like that, you know, like that, if we actually focus on that, if we actually are able to change that, to include that, you know, language into our regular conversations, regular society, I think that will help us push towards a better, you know, like a more inclusive, and, you know, like a culture where we can talk about consent, a culture where we can talk about sex in a little bit more of a, you know, like a not so, you know, like, oh my God, I'm offended, way, I think, like that will help normalize things, and people wouldn't, wouldn't feel as offended, or they wouldn't feel as, like they have to compete, or they have to get, like you said, Tamika, they have to win this person because, like it's the way it is. So I think, yeah, I mean, like if the United States, and if we talk about the world, I mean, we talk about other cultures, like for example, like in Latin America is, it's something else, and the objectification of women there is, it's even stronger, if I dare to say. So yeah, if we get to a point where we can actually like bring those things together, maybe we can have, a better chance of including consent into more of our community and more conversations.
There's a comment in the chat about a soft no, and I just want to be clear: a soft no is not a clear yes. So I think that's the best way to approach it. If it's not a clear yes, then it's still a no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I teach my students each week is if you don't have a yes, you have a no. If you don't know, it's a no. And it doesn't mean wear the other person down and you get a yes. It means you have a no. Nothing's going to happen today. Go have a good day. That's it.
I think maybe misconstruing signals sometimes. People think that because there's a certain activity going on that it's okay, that you're okay with all of it, even though you've said no. No, I'm not. And no means no. There's no soft no. There's no medium no. No is just no.
I think sometimes there's a misconstrual, and sometimes that misconstrual is intentional. And I actually, I know this is probably not the intent of the question, where in a state of altered consciousness does consent disappear? But I actually think that this discussion about wearing down people is a state of altered consciousness. It's a form of abuse, and it changes your ability to trust and understand your own instincts. After you've been told your no is invalid for long enough, you don't know what you feel or think anymore. It's gaslighting. It's an abuse tactic, and I don't consider a quote unquote yes, or even a I guess so, actually a true signature of consent. Because it was not given freely, and it was not given enthusiastically. It was given after wearing somebody down. Going back to that sense of entitlement, like your no is only no until I make it not one.
And I think we see that, all the time, that level of gaslighting that says that, people's reactions or responses to these things are, completely out of left field, or, overly sensitive, or whatever you want to call it. Right. And it's death by 1,000 tiny cuts, right? When you're, that sort of no is worn away, almost like you're wearing away, building material or the structure, so that the barriers become semi-permeable, right? And we see that in long-term abuse, but we also see it just even in media reactions, when topics of sexual assault come up, or sexually based crimes and killings or offenses. There's always that sort of gaslighting that's done to even just trying to make it about a single thing and not about a culture, right? And it's it's done at length, and it's it's as innocuous as Snow White in the forest getting kissed by some strange dude. That's the fairy tale, right? And so I think we talk about wearing down. I think wearing down doesn't even have to necessarily be directed harm. It's also by by a culture in general, and sometimes it doesn't look like wearing down. It looks, you know, a lot more innocuous than that. And those blurred spaces, right, are or implicit spaces are like where we get a lot of our information. And so I think, you know, like speaking about things openly and directly, like kind of takes away that like implicit learning and instead says like, this is what we're going to be learning directly about this, you know, about what consent is.
You know, you mentioned something about the movie and the white gown and all that, and that just reminded me of the Sleeping Beauty.
Mm-hmm.
I recently watched it again, sort of like I was just like scrolling through my phone and like played it, and you know, like there's this scene where the prince meets Aurora, and like, you know, he tries to grab her, and you know, like he's like, when will I see you again? And you know, she doesn't really, like, she's scared. I mean, like, she's scared, but she doesn't know what's going on. She's hanging out with the birds and the animals, and then this dude shows up, right? And it's like, what the hell is going on? And so I think you know, like movies and books are so important, you know, like showing actually like that was wrong. I mean, like that's terrible. Like, you know, like Aurora, like if Aurora had actually like, you know, like good role models that told her like you can't just like, you know, like talk to a random guy and like, you know, like just like let him touch you and like, you know, like dance if, you know, like you can, like you have to set boundaries. I think, you know, like Aurora would have been, what are you doing? I mean, like we barely know each other. Like you're trying to dance with me. Like I'm like I'm not gonna give you my phone number right now. And where would I see you again? I don't know. I mean, like
yeah,
what, you know, whenever. So I think movies and books, you know, because that's what we learn. I mean, like we watch that. I watched that when I was a little girl, and then you know, like you see it and it's normal. So if we actually have, you know, like a little bit more representation, more examples of what, you know, how things actually should be, that would help, you know, like ingrain in society and in like popular culture things that aren't right, you know, like one of my favorites. Sorry for bringing those like Disney movies now, but I think it's so important when we talk to kids, right? But I really love. I forgot Elsa's sister's name, but how, you know, she's about to get married and somebody and everyone's telling her like, but you just met the guy, like you just met him, like why are you gonna get married? Like you can't just get married with some random guy. I love that part, and I think, you know, that's what it needs to happen.
Yeah, I think that's like probably the most like honest representation I've seen of some like random guy like trying to woo some girl, like, you know, at least in the fairy tale realm, like where he turns out to like not be a good guy because, you know, you just met him.
Yeah.
It brings back to me how much it like it hurts everybody though. And I think that like this is the part that sometimes gets missed, is like it's also really toxic that like that we set up this expectation that people are to be pursued and that your value or worth as whatever. I mean, usually this is a coded masculine, but it's not exclusively coded masculine. Like your worth is whether or not you can conquest this person, and like these things are not it's not good for anybody, and it doesn't like allow genuineness, and it doesn't allow for, you know, vulnerability and conversations on that end either. And there's expectations put into place that like you're just gonna like, you know, want this, and men are just gonna want sex, and men are just gonna be good at it, and blah, 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 blah. And like that doesn't help anybody in either direction, and it doesn't represent reality, and it's so gender essentialist, right? Like there's such a broad spectrum of people's interest in and physical and emotional and psychological like connection to sex and intimacy and what that means, and this the culture that we've created is this binary, and binaries are so violent, and this is such a clear example of it, where like by pushing people to these extremes, we just ignore all of the beautiful nuance that can come with like conversation and consent and like having really intimate like vulnerability with each other. I mean, it comes down to vulnerability. Like consent involves vulnerability on both sides, because you're being honest about your needs and desires, and you might get like rejected, and you have to trust that doesn't mean that like this person like hates you or whatever. It's just like could be any number of things. there's a vulnerability that comes with the ask, and there's a vulnerability that comes with like the response. And vulnerability is not something we like are super good at in this culture.
Ooh, how does consent to sexual contact change in situations of domestic violence? Ooh,
That's a heavy one.
that's a real heavy one. Can you imagine someone beating your ass and then thinking about having sex with you afterwards?
Tap out of this.
Yeah,
Okay, that would be my example for that. And my mother is fine. Thank you for asking. She has tested COVID free.
Oh,
Thank God.
good.
All my apprehension around getting the vaccine has disappeared. I will be getting mine.
Good.
But
Good.
I wanted to add to this about relentless pursuit and stalking. And I should not have to be coerced into consent. You know, if I said no now, it's probably going to still be no. Even if at some point I do consent, I can always rescind it because I honestly probably did not want to do it to begin with. And I expect that to be respected. You know, and it is the worst feeling to be pressured into doing something that you do not want to do. And it when it comes to the sexual content, the contact and some people feel like once the act has taken place, you'll change your mind. No. If I'm not have that kind of connection with you, even as a sex worker, I say no all the time. I just don't do everybody. It's not, if it doesn't fit, I could walk away from it and be okay. I don't care how, if I do need the money. No still means no. That doesn't mean keep offering me more money. That doesn't mean keep following me. That doesn't mean keep calling me, keep inboxing me. No is going to be no from the beginning to the end. And it really boils down to a lack of respect for what I've said to you.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. The domestic violence one is really heavy because the violence aside, the abuse aside, even in a traditional marriage, if there's a problem and one partner says no, that's still no. I've heard so many horror stories about a partner being raped by another partner and people are like, can that happen? Can a husband rape his wife? Yes, 100%, and vice versa as well. So I think that's something that is so under discussed. Like we don't really talk about rape between intimate partners who are actually like in a committed relationship with each other. That's something that happens as well.
Yeah.
Taboo, but it's still very real.
And it wasn't even, I mean, not that I value the law very heavily, but it wasn't even illegal for a very long time. It was not actually considered legally rape or sexual assault for a very long time.
But
Absolutely.
we have popular culture. We have popular culture acknowledging that side of just roll over and let them have it. You know, just because they're asking for it. This is supposed to be my husband. I'm supposed to do it for him whenever, even if I'm sick, if I'm tired, or I just don't want to. No should still mean no. Baby, go in the bathroom and play with your own. You know, you can lay right there and do it. You know, that's what it's a lack of respect for people's autonomy. If I don't want to, that means don't push me and definitely don't take it.
Yeah.
I think we need to also get rid of, oh, he or she is just are playing hard to get. Like, no, if somebody says no, they're not playing hard to get. They legit mean no. It doesn't mean like keep trying harder until you get the answer that you want. Like, we shouldn't be using, oh, they're just playing hard to get. Like, it shouldn't be a saying anymore because they're not playing. They're being serious.
I think that kind of goes like to the question of domestic abuse, right? And that wearing down, because like where else? Like we know that like most sexual assault like happens by somebody that the survivor knows, you know, like that the victim knows. Like it most of the time it is like within, you know, some degree of relationship, like you know, whether it's marital or familial or like, you know, partnered, you know, romantically, like it's happening in close relationships. And where else do you have the time to like wear somebody down, not just like in the moment but like over time. And so you know, I think like one of the things in the definition of rape that like, you know, I'm actually kind of glad is in there, you know, and I think we need to pay more attention to it, is like the idea of like rape by deception, right? Like you know, somebody like promises or says, you know, verbally or contractually or whatever, like, you know, if this then, right, like, or this is what you're supposed to do. And I think, you know, we're all kind of taught that like we're supposed to just sort of like give consent in order to like get love and acceptance, like, you know, kind of across the board. And like I think it's very easy when people are like primed that way to like just when somebody pushes, even if it feels like a little, right, like we're reading that implicit message as well as the you know, the explicit one, and like responding from a place that's not just in the external pressure but the pressure that is like already internal, like inborn in society.
Also, in domestic violence, it doesn't always mean physical.
No.
My husband didn't beat me.
Mm-hmm.
What he did was emotionally and financially abuse me into compliance.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mhm.
taking away credit cards and hindering my ability to pay bills that were in my name, that we were both responsible for.
Mhm.
You know, and just emotionally draining me and manipulating me into doing his will.
Yeah.
You know, it gets kind of hard to want to have sex with someone that does that to you. You know, it got so hard that I left.
Yeah.
And the abuse continued after I left. You know, it's a situation that is very delicate, and when it comes to people who have survived these types of experiences, people need to listen to them and to offer them the help that they say they need. I needed to escape. I needed to vacate the premises. And as a trans woman, it was hard to do that through domestic violence.
Yeah.
You know, it left me having to go to my family to get assistance for something that they probably didn't want to do to begin with. They were against me being me to begin with, and then definitely against my marriage.
Yeah.
You know, and having all of that on my shoulder, and then having him adding to the problem of abusing me, you know, it just made it that much worse.
Yeah, it does. And you know, I feel for you on that. I have one of those too. Like psychological abuse takes a really intensive toll long term. And I think, you know, because we don't talk about it in terms of consent, right? Like we don't really talk about consent on an energetic level, which is kind of what that is. And, you know, I think like we're always looking for or for the sexual, but like a lot of times in relationships like that, you know, that you were describing to me, and that I'm sure other people have experienced as well, like you almost don't even know what's happening, because our definition of abuse, our definition of consent is like always like grounded in the physical and grounded in the sexual, and not, you know, sort of extended out to psychological. Like I think Scotland, like just very recently, like maybe passed a law that is somewhat related to that, for like a 5-year sentence for like coercive control or something on that level. But in the US, like we don't have anything here that even remotely touches that. Not that I'm like, you know, a big fan of law enforcement or the legal system, but like, you know, there isn't even the recognition that is something that's problematic. And I think, you know, that kind of makes it more epidemic, because we know that all abuse and a lot of sexual assault, like, you know, it happens within relationship, and like a lot of times there is that kind of coercive control, deception, gaslighting, you know, that's happening prior to or leading up to. Like anytime somebody gets hit, like usually there's been, you know, a psychological like war sort of launched, you know, prior to that as well, or you know, alongside it.
Yeah, no, it
You
makes
know,
me. Oh, sorry, Tamika.
I'm so against them creating a law to punish people for that instead of putting resources in place for the victim.
Yeah.
That money could be better used and time and energy could be better used if you support the victim.
Mm-hmm.
Give them options that they want, not these boxes that do not fit circumstances and situations.
Mhm.
There are nuances to every situation. Mine was a very nuanced situation.
Yeah.
You know, how not being a cis, you know, female
Mm-hmm.
in a what still is called a gay marriage, even though it is a legal binding marriage. It is not a civil union. You know, I made sure of that. That was what I wanted in a marriage, because this is going to be the only one. Now I'm facing divorce almost 10 years later because I didn't know how to get out of it, and I'm tired of asking him to go half. I'm pay for it myself, you know, and there is an ongoing stigma when it comes to victims of domestic violence. And it is not my fault. I did not go into this thinking that this would be the result.
No,
I went
nobody.
into this, I was
Nobody.
manipulated. He presented one side, and I
Oh,
swear
yeah.
it was like a complete flip.
Mm-hmm.
Not even
Nobody
a week
knows.
after we were married.
Yeah.
You know.
Or
You know,
you
and I'm
believe
sitting
that
there and
they've
I'm
changed.
doubting myself that this is what's really happening. You're just being extra sensitive.
No.
Mhm.
No,
But then
nobody
that's
knows
the
what gets
psychological
into
wearing
it.
down.
Yeah.
That's how they psychologically wear you down. If they just came in guns blazing, literally or figuratively,
Yeah.
that's a pretty unlikely scenario to win. That's why it works over time. It's a progressive deconstruction of your sense of self and your sense of autonomy and your sense of consent, and that comes out, like, back to what Aaron was saying, like that's beyond, like, it includes sex a lot of the time, but it's beyond that. It's your sense of consent for emotional, like, and labor and other things, and that
Definitely
wearing
did not
down and that
consent for the
gaslighting.
emotional roller coaster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that gaslighting makes you question your sanity constantly. And then on the flip side, like Tamika, you mentioned, like, it makes you not want to have, like, not be super interested in having relationships with that person. On the flip side, it might also make you scared not to, because if you're still invested in the relationship and you haven't, woken up yet, or whatever you want to call it,
Now, I was doing
then you
everything I
feel
could to please
guilty.
them.
Yep. Then you feel guilty and you're like, well, I have, they're going to be mad, or they're going to believe that I don't love them if I don't. So then you do it anyway. And
It was all that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Solidarity, mama.
And going to what you were saying, Tamika, like, absolutely, like, resources for victims. And I think, like, in general, starting by, like, believing, because I'm sitting here and, like, you can tell, like, there's a degree of, like, knowing, and kind of, like you said, Alex, like, waking up, like, or whatever we call it, where, like, afterward you can see it so incredibly clearly, and you can see it when it's happening to, like, other people, but it literally, like, is that flip. It's almost like there's a language written on top of, how people communicate or what they talk about, that, like, you can read, but, like, only after you've either really delved in and studied it, or and learned about it, or had that experience, I think, yourself, right? And so, like, it starts with, like, people just believing that, like, maybe there's something they don't know or they don't understand, like, and part of that wearing down too is that public persona of an abuser, and we see that, in pop culture, like we see it within our communities. Like, you know, they're very good at press releases, and like victims, survivors are not, because you're busy trying to survive. Like,
and getting blamed for being emotional. Like they get to be like, oh, see, they're just irrational. They're all over the place. Like, how can you trust them?
Yeah.
You know, that's not my fault. After having come from up under something, people have a tendency of just letting it all flood out because they're so relieved that somebody is listening and they're trying to have some understanding for what I have been living through. You know, that's where all of that comes from, because it's like the floodgates just bust open. You know, and all we are looking for is to be supported.
Yeah.
We're looking for help, resources, a way to escape the crazy and try to bring some semblance of normalcy back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and yeah, I felt funny being the victim, knowing everything that I do and have lived through and have seen and how I've helped other people escape these situations. Here I ended up in one.
I was gonna say, I have never better understood the term. I couldn't see the forest for the trees. Like, you're in it, and you're like, well, that was weird, but you know everything else, and then
you wake up and you're like, well, damn.
You're in the eye of the hurricane, like, you know, and until like you're not, and you're out, and yeah, I think, you know, it can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter how much, you know about it, or like have studied or have seen other people in those circumstances, because it you know, abuse is as individual as the abuser and as individual as the victim. It's tailor made to fuck with you. Forgive my language on that one.
Pretty much.
A-okay.
But I think, you know, going back to like what you said, and there needing to be support, and like needing that belief to sort of be there in the beginning, right? Because people are just like talking and want to be heard, and better out than in, because we know that, like, you know, abuse, we know that really any kind of like long-term psychological violence, like it like literally writes all over your nervous system. Like, that is, you know, where you get long-term health problems and autoimmune things, and, you know, high blood pressure, and everything that we see in people who are victimized by individuals and society. Like, you know, so it has the effect on your mind, and then this very tangible, you can see it right there, effect on the body as well.
Yes, and you know what? It happens again and again.
Yeah. Well, we have 5 minutes to close. I just wanted to say, I'm not going to take much of the time, but it will be great to hear from everyone. Closing, I think, in terms of domestic violence, for me, consent, it's consent doesn't exist, basically. Like, you cannot say no. Like, it just, like, you know, like in a domestic violence situation, saying no could be could be dangerous. It could be dangerous. It could be, you know, it could threaten your life. And you know, like, in situations like that, the only solution for you could be to say yes, and for you to say yes, and then continue your life. And it is not anybody's fault. And I think people need to understand that. And I think people need to stop asking, why didn't you leave? Because it's not that easy. Once you leave, you know, like when you leave, it could actually be more dangerous sometimes. You know, like, you can actually die. So, you know, we need to acknowledge that. We need to understand that, you know, like, people in those situations is not as easy. It's not easy to leave. There is a lot of problems in terms, you know, like your self-esteem. It's affected, basically your entire brain nature. It has been altered. So I think we need to be conscious of that, and then I'll close for that, and so that everyone else can talk.
Yeah. Also, with domestic violence, you're separated. The abuser separates you from all of your support system. So when you are ready to leave, you at that point you almost have nowhere to go. You know, you're cut off financially. You're cut off from the loved ones, your friends. So it's extremely difficult to leave, So that's why a lot of victims stay for so long before they totally break down and just get out. But it's very hard to leave. So that's why I want to say it's hard. It's good to trust your gut, but people are so manipulative and it's so much gaslighting that you don't even know until you're a foot deep that you're sinking.
Yeah, definitely. A high-profile DV educator in the DC area once called me like late at night. I would go to things with her and show up for her events, help her out, and she was in a situation herself, and she's reaching out for me for help, and I'm like, you can run circles around me with your subject on this, but she said, I can't do it for myself. She couldn't do it for herself, and that really hit me hard. And I had to really sit back and think, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
We have 2 minutes. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think, we like pretty much took that out like far and far in, and yeah, like underlying, right, like you're cut off from supports. So supports are the things that are needed the most, linking back to what you said, Tamika, like really and truly, whether that's community supports or organizational supports. I think we talked at one of the other panel discussions about, like, I think it might have been you, Vilo, who said that like having a whole agency or like something set up to really handle the nuance, right? Of sexual domestic abuse, like interrelational violence, like because there is so much nuance, and there is so much that can kind of go into it when it's like a long con like that. And also just in momentary interactions, and our current systems are certainly not helpful in any way, shape, or form for that. And I think that's why a lot of people don't come forward and they don't talk about things, because there isn't that support and there isn't that belief. But like all of those stories that are not being shared are like staying and living within the body of the survivors, right? And so just having a space to put that is maybe some move or step forward.
Yeah, the closing on this just brings it back to me to like the start of the conversation, which is like, what does it mean to have a culture of consent? And this all like these are all pieces of it, but there's this broader I don't know, these are the extremes of the culture that we have, that is based in like really not respecting like autonomy, consent, well-being of other people. And it's rooted in so many of the isms and colonialism, capitalism, puritanical cultures, things like that. And this, this is the inevitable, as it felt like was true with the violence that we saw in Atlanta and elsewhere. It's the inevitable extreme of a culture where we feel consent is not valued, where we feel entitled to each other's bodies, attention, just existence, labor, emotional energy. And unfortunately, the extreme happens a lot, like a whole lot. But it's also happening in like more micro aggressions and interactions on a daily basis. And I think there's like this tendency to say, as was mentioned earlier, like, oh, you're too sensitive, or like, don't take everything so seriously. And like, sometimes that's true, but also we have to pay attention to the little building blocks that create the bigger, because they don't come out of a vacuum. The big ones don't come out of a vacuum. They're built on the backs of these media references and the microaggressions and the little things that are instilled upon us from basically childhood and birth about how we interact with each other. I don't know. That's what the culture of consent means to me, at least.
Preach.
Yes.
Tamika, do you want to close?
Ooh, good Lord, good Lord, good Lord, good Lord. We need to shift what's going on away from negativity into positivity. You know, we need to build back what autonomy should be. You know, if I had total autonomy and agency over myself and people exercised it on themselves, when I say no, you automatically agree and don't push. We need to work on learning what self care means when people say no, because it is self care for me to say no. You know, people don't understand there are things in people's lives going on that can be interrupted by your relentless pursuit and pushing me to consent. Just respect my boundaries.
Yeah, let's respect each other's boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody.
Cool.
This was really a good conversation.
This was a great conversation.
This was great. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All
It's been
right.
a pleasure,
It's
y'all.
always a good conversation. I
Thank
love
everyone.
Always.
We'll
Take
see
care.
everybody next week.
It's a
Good night.
blessing.
See ya. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Before you leave, take a moment to feel into your body. Notice where you are experiencing sensation, if any, within your body. Now begin to reorient yourself to the room around you. Look to your left. Look to your right. Look in all directions, including behind you, and notice that you are safe here. Take a deep breath here. Notice the sensation of your feet and the soles of your feet. If you notice that your body is highly activated, take a few moments to stand up, move your arms and your legs, or go outside and take a walk, noticing the earth around you. Soften the focus of your eyes so you can come into your peripheral vision. If you're needing immediate support, please call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. To dig into healing work with a somatic experiencing practitioner, you can find a practitioner local to you at www.traumahealing.org. If you want to work in a group, you can email at sahealingcircle@dreamcityhealing.co or reach out to connect@dreamcityhealing.co if you need personal support in finding the resources that are right for you. Keep doing the work. It's worth it.